Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Turning it up.
I can tell you're gonna bring it today, Charles.
Hello, everybody. One and all, thank you, Dylan, and welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because today we are talking about our favorite fathers in fantasy.
Otherwise known as...
Yes, and
is that going to translate in the audio format?
I think it will.
There's 3 Fs.
There's 3 Fs, and this is a response to yet another one of Fantology's
another
brackets.
F.
Another F. Friends, fantasy, Fantology, favorites, fathers, it's all here.
Bears beats Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, that's right, for all you Office fans out there.
Yes.
But for all you fantasy fans out there, we're talking about fathers today. You know, in the spirit of Father's Day, which is already happened at this point, but it is the month of Father's Day, and you don't just stop celebrating the fathers out there in the world. And, well, that's what we're going to do today. For the fantasy world, we are taking a look at our submissions to our favorite fathers bracket, and then we're going to maybe drop a few honorable mentions along the way.
Sure.
And, I'm excited to get into it.
Yes, and shout out to Fantology Podcast. They're awesome dudes. If you're listening to us, you probably have come across them too, probably listening to them. So definitely, if you are someone who has not yet, highly recommend checking out what those guys are doing over there. And I also recommend checking out these awesome polls that they're running on Twitter. And if you want to check out the polls or even get involved in the polls, you can give them a follow at Fantology_books. And a lot of awesome content going on over there. And you'll see us submitting entries to these. And today, so yes, thank you to Fantology for your awesome Twitter community engagement and for giving us ideas for episodes.
Yes, thank you for the episode
too.
Ideas. That's right. We appreciate the inspiration for the content, and definitely follow Fantology_books on Twitter. And I believe at the time this episode comes out, the contest will be nearing its end, so you can still go and vote on the winner. You can't vote for us anymore. We've been eliminated, but, you know, that's how it goes sometimes. We did our best. And we are very confident in our choices as well. And so maybe we'll get a little redemption here, pleading our case to our own listeners. So
we're always seeking redemption.
We're always seeking redemption, and we always try to live honorably as well, I would say, Dylan.
Oh.
And
well, you know who lived honorably, Charles?
No, who lived honorably?
Ned Stark. From A Song of Ice and Fire and Game of Thrones.
Of course. Ned Stark from A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Also played by Sean Bean on the show A Game of Thrones on HBO. Terrific father figure. Obvious first choice for this contest. And I'm looking at the bracket now, and I see a lot of Ned Stark fans out there. Not too many. But I see like 4 or 5, which is kind of a lot. So big love for Ned, and I can see why. We almost always, if not submit a Game of Thrones character, have an honorable mention Game of Thrones character for these kinds of things, because we are just huge Game of Thrones fans, and those characters are absolutely incredible. And Ned Stark is no exception.
He definitely is not an exception here, Charles. My favorite moment probably with Ned when it comes to his fathering is when, this is all real early stuff. If you're one of the folks who haven't seen the Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones,
this episode is spoiler free.
Yes, it's spoiler free. But yes, Charles, and I don't think you'll have a problem with the moment I'm talking about, which is when Arya Stark, his youngest daughter, she, despite being a girl in this extremely patriarchal society that takes place in Game of Thrones and Song of Ice and Fire, she wants to learn how to fight with swords, and he starts getting her sword lessons with Syrio Forel. And those are just really fun scenes you get with Arya, and there's this, I always think of this show because it's just so vivid in my memory, and that's and I think of the moment where Ned is kind of standing there watching her, and she has these moments with Ned where she's trying to express, hey, I want to be this kind of person, and Ned, as such a fantastic father, despite being I'm real honorable, I care a lot about these societal rules, but I also want you to be who you are. So he actually gets her sword lessons. That's always stuck out to me as a great Ned fatherly moment.
Yeah, that's a great moment, and I think two of my fatherly moments that I love about Ned Stark, the first being at the very, very beginning, and again, even before that scene, so it's not a spoiler to say, he has a famous quote that says, he goes, he who passes the sentence should swing the sword.
Yes,
and he's telling that to
scene.
His sons. And right before, I'll say passing a sentence on somebody.
Yes.
And you can see later on in the show, deep into the show, as we follow all these characters, you can see the influence that Ned Stark's fatherly presence had on them throughout the entire show as they grow up. The show's 8 seasons long, right? So that's a long time to grow and develop as an individual. And you see how some of these characters are not necessarily defined by their father, but how their behavior, their sense of honor, of duty, of trying to do the right thing. It's kind of what makes the Starks the heroes in a series that doesn't really have good guys and bad guys. It's these fatherly advice, amongst other things, that make you really want to root for Ned and his family, and to watch his family try and live up to, Ned's own fatherly advice. How can you be isn't that the best you can do as a father?
I agree, Charles. Was Ned Stark completely perfect in every way in Game of Thrones? Of course not. No one is perfect, and you can't expect that. But his wonderful care for his children, his efforts to always try to be a good person and support them and let them be who they are, definitely, like you said, shows through how his children show up and develop. I definitely think, his oldest son, Rob, you see a lot of ways in which he chose to try to emulate Ned and be like him. And his, in a lot of ways, struggles to live up to, you're going to have this, just the Ned Stark aura of so much honorableness.
Yes.
Right?
Honor.
It's honor, so much honor. Either way, you see that from him, and I also love he's got kind of this steady, honorable presence, and then he's got his wife Catelyn bringing that ferocity in a lot of ways, and even though Ned is the wolf born to the Stark clan, and Catelyn is a Tully, which their sigil's a fish. I've always felt like Catelyn brought that wolfish ferociousness to balance out Ned's kind of stolid, almost stoic honor. And I just love them as a duo and as a mother and a father to all those children.
Very well said. Yeah, and of course, Catelyn Stark made it onto our favorite mothers list last month, and that's no coincidence. the family unit of the Starks is like the narrative focus of this show for so long, and you just love these characters, and it's the home that they create and the philosophies that they try to bestow not only on the kingdom but on their children. And I think watching that play out across 8 seasons of television, it is what makes them so good, and being a father is a huge part of that. And to me, being a good father in fantasy is not just like being the son of the chosen one. It's just being a good dad, which is teaching your kids to, do the right thing, or to own your actions, or to, like, be realistic, be practical, like accept responsibility. Exactly. I was thinking more winter's coming, like, and I also was thinking, like, if you're passing the sentence, you should swing the sword. Like, own that. There's other families that maybe are quick to pass sentence and not swing the sword afterward, have someone else swing the sword. Yes. So it's those kinds of things that make the Stark family and make Ned as a father stand out. So that's why I think we both picked him as a fatherly character, because I'll say there's a character who's made it on this list quite a bit, and again, we're only 4 books into this series, but we have Tam Althor from Wheel of Time, and he's not on our list. And I think, we have many books to go, so we'll see. But
you've read all of them, though, Charles.
I've read all of them.
So I think that, I know it's been a while, and you always back away from this in your Perrin Ibarra style, Charles. Despite all your heroism, you're like, oh, whatever. Like, you've read all of them, so I want to. Right. I mean, it's been a while, but
it's been a while.
You've got to take here, Charles. You can.
I've got to take. Perrin and the Starks actually have a lot in common, and I've mentioned that on our Wheel of Time episodes. But anyway, Tam, he's the son of Rand, who is the main character of the book.
You mean Rand is the son of him?
Yes, Rand is the son of Tam. Yes, thank you. And I mean, he has moments, but him being a father, like, that's literally who he is. He's the father of the main character. Yeah. Him actually being a father doesn't really have anything to do with the narrative so much, whereas with Ned Stark, it's like him being a father is everything. These characters, like, were his children were just in love with him and took all of his lessons to heart, and even sometimes when they were challenged or rejected or accepted, it was always something that was taken very seriously with his children. And to me, that's what being a father is. So big props to Ned, Charles, on that one. Yes.
Yeah, that's so insightful. You have me really thinking about these two now, and the way I'm thinking about it after what you said is this, like, everything in Wheel of Time, in just like every way possible, kind of like spins around Rand as that main character. And like you're saying, it's like, who is Tam? Tam is relative to Rand in every sense of that word, right? Like, and then you think of the narrative and story in Game of Thrones, and it starts with Ned as the clear main character, and everything kind of spins around him and his fatherly wisdom and influence on others. So I think that, I'm trying to echo this kind of sentiments that you're getting across there, Charles. Right. Of, like, Ned's fatherhood is the driving force of the story in so many ways for Game of Thrones. And Rand is the driving force and the stuff that moves around him, and Tam just so happens to be his father.
Exactly. Yeah. I think what we're getting at is fatherhood is like a theme and a narrative of Ned Stark, whereas it's like a fact of Tam. So it's like,
hey, he's all over the. I hope we don't get any. We are enjoying Wheel of Time, and we're
he's an obvious choice because he's so obviously, like, he's a famous father in fantasy, but he, like, it doesn't drive the narrative as deeply or thematically as Ned's fatherly presence does in Game of Thrones and with the Stark family. So that's the difference to me. It's like, Wheel of Time's a huge series. Tam is like one of the only characters that you could say by name who is a dad, at least in the beginning of Wheel of Time. Like, how many father characters are there that we know in the first 4 books? Like, not too many. So it's interesting to see that he's the one that gets the lines and is the father and all that. So yeah, obvious choice, but I don't know. I think it goes a step further in Game of Thrones with Ned's character because he is raising all of these Stark children that go on to have all of these adventures. So where they go from the beginning as a result of Ned's parenting is super fascinating. So that's why you have to pick Ned.
Yeah, and we did. So
we sure
for
did.
All we didn't win, but we did.
No, but a lot of the people that are still in it have. You know, I think the winning team's going to have Ned in it, but nothing's guaranteed.
You think so? Okay.
I think so. The next character that we've picked, we might have been the only ones that submitted this one. I'm looking to double check, and it looks to be so, which is interesting.
A bummer.
Yeah, it's a bummer because this book just came out last month, swept the Twitter sphere by storm with its incredible book cover and incredible presence of author John Gwynne. And this is, of course, The Shadow of the Gods. And
incredible book.
Incredible book. We had the honor, the pleasure, the privilege of talking about this book with Sam Book in Hand not too long ago. And then the episode before this one, we spoke with the brothers Gwynne, John Gwynne's children. So
which
talk
was
about
so much fun.
Yeah, talk about like a fatherly presence, right? We get to talk to the author's children. So there's something in there.
Yeah, I'll say based on how amazing his children are, that John probably deserves a spot. If we're allowed to pick authors for our top 3 fathers challenge, the guy's done an amazing job.
I would put Papa Gwynne on this list.
Papa Gwynne. And definitely check out the brothers Gwynne on if you have. I mean, I'm sure a lot of our listeners already have. They're doing awesome stuff over on their YouTube channel too. So check out Will and Ed over there. But anyway, let's talk about Thorkel.
Yes,
Thorkel.
You said it, Thorkel. So Thorkel's not a POV character, Dylan. He is not.
He is not.
He is a supporting character to our POV character Orca. And Orca is one that, I mean, I've gone down to say is my favorite character in Shadow of the Gods. I know, Dylan, you've championed a few other characters in the series as well, but Orca to me stands
Orca might, I like Elvar a lot, but I think it's a very, her storyline appeals to me. I always think of Orca as kind of the, character that's going to be most iconic from the Shadow of the Gods.
You can see, you can see how maybe, she's not. There's other characters that appeal to your specific taste too, and that's awesome. And I
love Orca. Don't get Orca's a freaking amazing character. I wish we'd read it in time to. I wish we'd read Shadow of the Gods in time to have Orca on our favorite mothers from last month. Because I'm sure we
definitely
would
put her. We would have put her on the list for sure if we had read the book in time. Because talk about how the theme of being a parent plays into a character arc. Like Orca's arc is not all about her being a mom, but it's an important part, and it's interesting how that plays into her storyline. And again, this is spoiler free, so go read Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. But what's interesting is because we're talking about fathers today, and Thorkel is Orca's husband, and of course the father to Orca's child. And what I love about Thorkel, and we did talk about this in our Shadow of the Gods episode, but he is such a good compliment to his wife, who is the POV character, and the two of them together, watching them make a home in this world that's very harsh and unforgiving and full of monsters. It's a really wholesome thing to see, and it's some of the most hopeful, modern approaches of writing a family unit in fantasy that I've ever seen. You can read a story like Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time, and families are very hierarchical. They're based on royalty kind of. It's very formal, some politicking going on maybe, but somehow there's this intimate idea of the nuclear family that's portrayed in the beginning of Shadow of the Gods that I just really love. And watching Thorkel and Orca go back and forth talking about how do we raise our kid in this harsh world? Are we being too harsh? Are we being too soft? And they have these debates, but it always comes from a place of love. And to me, like, that is being a father. It's learning to, like, co-parent with your wife even when you have disagreements, and not going to bed angry, and creating a happy home even when things are not doing well. And if that's not what makes a favorite father in fantasy, then I don't know what is, Dylan.
That's so well said, Charles. Yeah, that balance between those two, and I just grabbed my copy of the Shadow of the Gods to relive it, because you had me thinking about the first scene. So yeah. Oh, Charles, you've got yours too. You just always keep that within hands reach.
Always keep it in arm's reach. We're showing each other over Zoom our copies of Shadow of the Gods.
So, like, literally, when you think of that balance between Orca and Thorkel, the first thing that happened, literally the first line, chapter 1, is from Orca saying, the line is, "Death is a part of life," Orca whispered into her son's ear. And it's like, that's the kind of lesson you're getting from Orca. And then within the first, it's like this hunting scene. And like, part of what I'm trying to do is just like, get people, just read that first line and keep going.
Yeah.
But I highly recommend it if you haven't read The Shadow of the Gods yet. And then within a few pages, we have Thorkel saying, "It was not your fault." Like, the Fellwolf startled them, like, when this hunting scene is going on, and it's a kiddo, Brekka's the kid, and he's learning stuff, and he's literally got his mother whispering in his ear that, like, stuff about death, and then which is a very important lesson in the very like, messed up in all the best ways world in the Shadow of the Gods, where, like, monsters could come out at any moment, and it's just constant chaos and danger and conflict and this kind of stuff. And you need someone like Orca to teach those lessons, but you also need Thorkel coming in and saying, "Hey, it's not your fault. It isn't, when, like, all these sort of messed up things happen, and those kind of things are unavoidable." And Orca kind of teaches, hey, these things are going to happen. And Thorkel comes in and teaches, when they happen, it's not your fault, son. And that it's such a beautiful lesson, and that compliment that you bring up, how those two complement each other to raise a child, is incredible. I just love Thorkel's grounded, mindful, kind presence. And I do think of Orca and Thorkel in some ways as turning the dial up to 11 on what I was talking about with that balance between Ned and Catelyn, where it's like, Ned is more stoic, more stolid, more kind of like not trying to take drastic actions, and Catelyn's more rash, more, she's not a fighter in the way Orca is, but she's more like rash and making quick, hastier decisions and fierce. And you kind of like turn up the dial on both of those things for each character in the Shadow of the Gods, where Orca is freaking intense with her, like, wolfishness and ferocity and all this kind of stuff. And she's a fighter and a warrior too. And Thorkel is, I think, even more kind of a, like, softy than Ned is.
Definitely.
Yes. Like, Ned's hard but softy underneath, and Thorkel wears his soft, like, his emotional vulnerability and stuff on his sleeve.
Right, exactly. I mean, Ned's always like, winter's coming, you gotta be prepared to swing the sword. True. This, that, and that. He'll sneak in a few fun moments here or there, but like you said, Thorkel wears it on his sleeve, and it's such a stark contrast to what we see in
stark contrast. Nailed it.
Oh, thank you very much. It's
you literally just made a stark contrast where you contrasted Thorkel from Ned.
Thank you.
Nailed it.
Thank you, listeners.
That's the kind of stuff you'll only get on FTF. Yeah.
Very well said, guys. Look, at the FTF Podcast 1 on Twitter, if you want to see this kind of banter continue.
No, follow at Charles_MC if you want that kind of content.
Charles_MC as well. Guys, come on. We're out here making these kind of segs just for you. This wordplay, this fantasy wordplay. So, in stark contrast to Ned Stark, we're going back to Thorkel, and look, there's a couple reasons why you could pick a character to submit to this bracket. You could submit them because they're one of your favorite characters who is a father, or they can be a character that embodies, like, the theme of being a parent or being a father incredibly well. And, Thorkel's a bit of both. His driving piece in this story is that he is a father and a husband. So you could also submit him for like a top husband in fantasy. He's like really good at that. And he's also a good father. And that's because he's willing to wear some of those emotions on his sleeves. It's almost like he dares to do it. And Orca almost feels a bit of this reservation. And like, you could tell in the beginning, you don't know what's going on with her, but you could tell that she might be a little guarded for whatever reason. Her past is a bit mysterious. But she does have her guard up quite a bit. And I think that's why she just loves Thorkel so much. And their love is very clear and apparent as well. And apparent, see that what I'm doing here. And
nailed it, Charles.
Thank you. And so
Charles_MC everyone on Twitter.
And I just love that. So I thought that was a great entry. And yeah, just a great father in fantasy.
Yeah. And I guess it's like kind of shocking to me we're the only ones to put Thorkel, but I guess some of what's happening is like the POV characters oftentimes are going to get a boost.
Yeah, and there's a lot of classics in here.
Then very famous, I'm seeing like Arthur Weasley everywhere, Tam all over the place, of course.
Yeah, Arthur Weasley kind of surprised me. There's not a lot of like fathers in Harry Potter, so he's like the most obvious choice in one of the biggest fantasy series ever. And he is a nice guy and a fun character, but I mean, there's nothing about him being the parent of all the Weasley children that I thought was particularly insightful. I just thought he was a funny guy because he's a magical guy who's super interested in Muggle life, right? So he's like, what is the purpose of a rubber duck? He's like, in a world where there's so much magic and whimsy, he's obsessed with pedestrian non-magic life, which is kind of funny, but to me that's where that kind of ends.
And Thorkel is like I don't want to I like it. Charles, you'll have to hold up the Harry Potter end of this.
I am a big Harry Potter
know by
fan.
now it's not my
I'm a bigger Harry Potter fan than you, for sure,
by quite a bit.
And I do like to see, there's moments where he stands up and is brave and will fight and things like that, and you cheer him for that. Like you cheer the Weasley parents on. Like I have no problem submitting Mrs. Weasley for best mother. That was one of our honorable mentions.
I convinced you not to, but
I would have been happy to put her up there, and a lot of people did. She was by far the most submitted, and I can see that. Where it doesn't surprise me that Ned is kind of getting more billing than Arthur Weasley, but not by much, man. I'm not sure. It's close. So
Arthur's all over the place on this poll.
He's everywhere.
I'm just looking. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
I mean, probably more entries than not have Arthur Weasley. If not, it's like half. But, yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so interesting.
So, it's an interesting submission, but, not the one that we picked. Because the one that we picked we were, again, the only one that submitted this character, which I kind of get, but I'm still kind of, disappointed. Because other people have submitted things from Saga in the past. It's rare, but it happens. Saga is like one of the most beloved modern comics in the game right now, so we do see Saga come up every once in a while, but we're the only ones that submitted Saga today. And of course, I mean, look, Saga, fathers, yes, it's Marco.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples is the illustrator. Yeah, fantastic work.
Incredible.
Those comics. We are talking, this is probably reaching, it's like, we kind of do this thing, Charles, when characters start coming up and these like favorite top 3 challenge things, where Saga is coming up all the time.
Yeah,
for
we've
us.
submitted Saga a couple times.
Yeah.
We did Lion Cat, I remember.
Yeah, we did. It's so interesting.
We did Alana. We did Marco now. At least
I've been finding, I know I want to get into Marco as a character, but what I find kind of interesting is we don't end up picking Joe Abercrombie characters as frequently as I'd expect, and I think it's because like they always fall out. Like Abercrombie has such a unique like voice that he's like he's not going to play a straightforward, like, father that we're like, well, yeah, that makes me think of, like, the best father in fantasy. It's like, well, incredible characters, but they're also, like, there's so many layers.
Yeah, like,
to
I'm
them.
trying to think of, like, what characters in First Law are fathers without spoiling anything. And
Oh, Charles, I've got an honorable mention. We can mention after Marco.
Okay. So
let's get Marco.
Let's get Marco. Let's talk about Marco, because, like, we always say when we bring up Saga that it's, like, one of our favorite works of fiction, hard stop, and that remains true. And we will read it, just kind of waiting for it to get a little more relevant in popular culture again when they released that next volume, which it made headlines like a year ago that they were working on it again. So we'll see where that goes. Maybe we'll just have to realize enough is enough and just start doing it. But for now,
I feel like a I don't want to put the pressure on something like that, but I feel like a read along could be fun.
Dude, I could go like page by page of the first volume if that probably wasn't like blatantly just sharing the book with everyone over the air, but I don't know.
I don't know, Charles. I'd love to see you live stream that or something. If we can get that figured out by then.
I have many thoughts.
Because you could show it on the screen and talk about it.
I mean, I love Saga, so huge fan.
You got me into it.
Yes, I did. I've recommended it to as many people as I could possibly recommend it to. I've like purchased it for people and given it as gifts. I've done it all, and everyone always likes it, and for a good reason, because these characters are incredible, and it's around Alana and Marco and their child. Mm-hmm. Like, the very first page is Alana giving birth, and Marco is there, right? So, and they're giving birth on like this dirty car garage, basically, but it's in space, so it's a spaceship mechanic shop, and the story just takes off from there. It's about a family trying to survive in a harsh world. Sound familiar? Almost like Shadow of the Gods.
That's every other pick. It's literally every other pick that we've had is like, we always find out stuff about our taste here, Charles, like by the end of it. And I'm like, we picked a bunch of people who are these kind of, and I think Marco falls in this category in his own unique way, as do the other two characters we picked, like the more, like, I guess, like, I don't want to say more, like the less ferocious of the two, I would say, in just their general. Marco obviously has some soldiering in his past and some things that
he likes to wear his emotions on his sleeve.
Yeah, he does. He's vulnerable.
He tries to walk away from violence. Yeah, and that's actually a big part of his arc. But yeah. It's interesting because I wonder if Chung Gwyn has read Saga, because if he hasn't, I think he'd really like it, because it follows a very similar family dynamic, and the fact that it focuses on family, it's such an honest portrayal of like these arguments, these nuclear arguments, these contained arguments that any family would have. And then you have these intergalactic conflicts that an epic fantasy series would have. So being able to go back and forth between the two makes Saga so incredible. And a large part of that is the relationship between Alana and Marco is all over the place. They're like in crazy love one moment, they're having arguments the next, they're taking breaks, they're coming together, they're doing all this stuff, and they're worried about their child, and they're trying to plan for the future, and this world is just doing everything it can to keep them down. And to watch, like, the only reason they're struggling and persevering is because of their relationship as a couple and also as parents. And I think it comes back to just that, that love for your family and trying to do right by them and imparting some of that into your child, into your partner, into your family. It is so powerful, and Marco does that in spades in Saga. So, I mean, we had to put him on the list. I recognized he wasn't going to be as popular as Arthur Weasley, but you know what? He had to come on here because he embodies that fatherly spirit so well throughout the story.
And I know I was a worse offender than you in this, Charles, but I do want to say it's cool if people like Arthur Weasley, it's y'all can like who you like and all that kind of stuff. We don't want to crap on. And I know I was worse than you, Charles. So, but yes, and Tam and all that. It's
I did
good.
take a jab at Arthur Weasley there, but I did also explain why Arthur Weasley I like him. So I feel like I'm a bit validated.
No, you did better than me. No, you did better than me with it.
But I did take an actual shot got at him though, which you didn't do. But
okay. Well, anyway, let's talk a little Marco, and I think that some of the just beauty of Marco as a character and this family, like you said, Charles, is somehow in Saga, Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples are able to depict this thing that should be so unrelatable to, they'll say, star-crossed lovers who have gotten caught in the middle of an intergalactic war, basically, between these two, do they call them races in that, Charles?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's the ones with the wings and the one with the horns.
Yeah, yes. And they have this child together that can almost be a symbol of something that neither side is particularly interested in happening. Like, both sides are kind of invested in this war, between this intergalactic war. And it's like, somehow something as big as that is brought all the way down to this like ridiculously relatable relationship between two people. And the way I see it, other folks might have a different read on the series. The way I see it is like two people genuinely trying their best to make a relationship work despite all of the challenges. And I think both have this deep sense of support and care and love for each other and their family, their daughter. And it's like, to watch two people so relatably struggle with things that are so tremendously like scary beyond anything that we could ever imagine really dealing with in our own lives. It's like, it's inspiring, honestly, from like a relationship perspective, that to watch these two continue to support and care while there are countless just worlds that want them dead. And if those two, Marco, can bring that just wonderful care and support and vulnerability that he shows, and so does Alana. We talked about Alana on our favorite mothers, who can hear us talk about her. But yeah, those two can bring that despite these intergalactic threats. It's inspiring. It really is. That folks like you and I, Charles, out in this world, maybe we can deal with some of the harsh stuff out there too.
Yeah, it is inspiring, and it is incredibly relatable somehow. Like, kudos to Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples for making that happen. And I think a large part of the success of that is Alana and Marco are not perfect individuals. They weren't born out of prophecy. They aren't of noble birth. They are by no means prepared to be a couple, let alone parents, by the time they were kind of thrust into this situation. And then to watch them handle all the struggles that come with that, or struggles that so many couples and young parents, when I say young parents, I mean parents of like new parents, face these similar challenges all the time. And to watch them like fumble through it and just try and compromise, it is magical, and it increases the stakes when we do pan out into this wider conflict. It's like, oh snap, they're trying to get these people and these people trying to get those people, and it gets so complicated and convoluted, and the action and the violence are so engaging. But it all comes down to family, Dylan, and that's what makes Marco stand out as a father in fantasy.
For sure, Charles. That's so well said. And I think of times, too, where Marco has to play more of the primary caretaker role. And you don't see a ton of that from fathers in fantasy, I feel like.
That's right. There was a time where Alana...
more the breadwinner. Yeah.
Because they had an awesome conversation about, we need to get jobs. Like, how are we going to raise this kid? Which is like a hilarious thing to think about in a fantasy
in the middle
story.
of an intergalactic war.
Yeah, exactly. And so then Alana gets a job and Marco raises the child. And it's super interesting to see that unfold. And then there's some, interpersonal drama around that too, which is really interesting. And it's great. And it's so true. And I think that breathes a lot of life into Marco as a character. And it's really awesome. And then, of course, there's so many other things going on with Marco beyond him being a parent that I just love.
Yeah, some are kind of spoilery.
Yeah, we don't need to get into it. Yeah. But I mean, we've said a lot already, and just go read Saga if you haven't already. Go read Shadow of the Gods if you haven't already. Dude, go read. If you haven't read Game of Thrones, I don't know what to do. Go check that out for sure.
Charles.
It's just funny because like that's what started it all for us. So definitely.
Well,
go read it.
We started a fantasy podcast before I'd even read Lord of the Rings, so I want to be charitable to folks that haven't read some classics. But it's. Anyway, point being, Charles, shall we get into the honorable mentions? Do you have any that come to mind?
We already talked about Tam, and we already talked about Tam, and we already talked about Arthur Weasley. I know you were teasing one earlier. I want to hear who that is.
Well, we're talking about Joe Abercrombie, and I think our Joe Abercrombie fans will appreciate Logan's father, who never appears on the page, but is responsible for Logan's axioms about, like, you have to be realistic about these things, which we were talking about earlier.
Never have too many knives.
Yes, once you've got a task to do, better to do it than live with the fear of it. All of these, never have too many knives, another great one. It's like Logan's character, so much of his, like, what makes him such an interesting character, and a character that I said way back on one of our first episodes ever, I said, changed my life with some of these. Like that, once you've got a task to do, better to do it than live with the fear of it. Advice I've always tried to take in my day-to-day life in ways that are hopefully helpful. I know Logan, from the start has a bloody past, so we can speculate on how helpful it's always been for him. But that being said, Logan's character is so defined by these, like, simple wisdoms that are like very deep and intelligent in their own ways. And so many of those are life lessons that his father tried to pass down to him. So for a character that never even appeared on the page, he has had such an incredible incredible you can speculate on, but a strong, like, influential influence, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, on a character that, I mean, if we just did top characters in fantasy, Charles, I guess you and I would have to decide if we wanted to do Glock or Logan, because we probably wouldn't want to include multiple First Law characters, and those two are so... But yeah, Logan, for me, when we recorded that first ever, favorite characters in fantasy episode back, like second episode or whatever we did for FTF, I was talking about Logan, and so much of what I was talking about was passed down to him from his father, Charles. So,
yes, that's true. That's a fun one, because I was trying to think of, like, what fathers are there in the First Law? I see someone on this list listed a character that, to me, I didn't, could be considered a spoiler, because but it's
Charles
okay.
Still catching up on Joe Abercrombie's work, and now speculating on something.
Hey, I'm pretty darn far, okay? I'm only, like, 2 years behind. So, and I used to be way longer. So
I know. No, I'm pumped you're getting there.
I don't want to name it on here to keep things spoiler free, but the premise of that is an interesting one. And again, I don't think it's what I can read, I'm not upset. Yeah, I'm not upset or anything. It's not worth it.
You'll be fine. Yeah, you'll be fine, Charles. We just don't want to say it, but I think knowing you, this is not a spoiler.
Right. No, I'm not worried either. Someone listed Uncle Iroh, which I think is a great pick, and I believe this individual is still in the competition too. I think they're going to go all the way, honestly.
That's Tam Althor,
Ned Stark and Uncle Iroh. That's a strong... Yeah, you're in to win it when you list those three characters, so great picks. Uncle Iroh's my favorite character in Avatar for a lot of reasons. He may have been in my favorite characters list way back. Yeah, that's funny. So,
he was.
So, Uncle Iroh, I didn't even consider putting Uncle Iroh on the list, but it makes tons of sense. I'm happy with the ones we have, and I don't think I'd change them, but that would have been a great one to submit, and I'm glad someone did. I see Mr. Incredible on here, which I find hilarious, but then the more I think about it, I'm like, okay, it's actually a good pick, too.
Oh, it is. Oh, yeah. I had the same exact reaction where I was like, I don't usually think of, like, superhero movies as fantasy, but, like, I think it's totally fair to. And Mr. Incredible is a fantastic father, and those are great movies.
Yeah, those are great movies. I just love it. It's like, math is math, he's like pointing at the thing. And you're like, yeah, okay, this guy can lift cars. And he's trying to teach math to his child. Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. And that's another character where they had like he took on the caretaker role in Incredibles too. So that was an interesting one to explore as well. It's got me thinking of like, Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, classic father figure there, passing down isms to their heirs, so.
Oh, Charles. I've got one that could be a Star Wars spoiler. It's the most obvious one. I don't want to say it even though it's like literally like, I feel like it's not a spoiler at this point.
Interesting.
You know what I'm saying.
You're going to really put...
And no one picked that person.
Yeah, that's actually true. You'd think...
Isn't that kind of shocking?
It is kind of shocking. Yeah. Man.
Yeah.
Maybe on my on the Roger pod, we'll have to submit next time.
Check out Roger podcast. That's
if you're
Charles'
a Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
What do you? And if you're a fan of all this clever wordplay I've been dropping throughout the day, guys. I mean, do we all remember when I said stark contrast earlier in the episode, guys? Come on. If you like that and you like Star Wars. I'm not gonna. Roger.
Dislike me? That is the magic.
If you're like, man, I wish I could hear this guy talk to someone else for a change.
I love it. No, he does talk. Yeah, he does talk to our wonderful.
Then have we got a show for
Derek.
you?
Yeah. That's like the main pitch. Charles talking, and you don't have to listen to Dylan at all. And it's also about Star Wars.
Well, we gotta have you on one of these days. But yes. Anyway,
definitely.
we would have definitely submitted that character.
Can I tell them where to follow on Twitter? At Roger Pod.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And that's Roger, a Star Wars podcast. If you're a Star Wars fan, I really do highly check it out. Charles and Derek are, when you're not doing like Bad Batch, which I haven't been watching, I get in there, I listen, and you guys are doing awesome stuff.
Thank you.
It.
Yeah, we're very new, so things are learning as we're going. But yeah, thank you. Yeah. Don't want to.
Derek is taking well to start. Yes.
Another lifelong friend. We've known each other for the same amount of time, all three of us. So, it's some more wonderful chemistry over there. But
yes,
we've got plenty of wonderful chemistry going on over here right now, talking about all of these fathers. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've done it all. So many honorable mentions. This was a fun one. Love talking about Game of Thrones and Saga and some new stuff like Shadow of the Gods. It's great, and I couldn't think of a better place to do it than on the podcast that I have with my lifelong friend and co-host Dylan.
Couldn't have said better myself, Charles. Always a pleasure to talk about anything with you, Charles. Definitely fantasy, definitely favorite fathers in fantasy.
From Fantology.
The Fantology poll. All those F's floating around, and the biggest... Oh, God. I don't want to finish.
we got it.
And when I think about the letter F, what comes up for me is my lifelong friend, Charles, and our fun pursuit of friends talking fantasy. Let's keep this fun rolling, Charles, and we will... Geez, this is a Wednesday episode, so we'll keep the fun going soon, and we
got the re-release Friday going on this summer, guys. We get to bring back, dust off some of the older episodes, and that's been a lot of fun to go back. And originally they were kind of cringy. I'm not gonna lie, to listen to some of those old episodes, but
yes,
I've come to like it now. I'm glad we're doing it because it's like exposure therapy.
I don't listen
almost.
to them. I'm just trusting the process. I'm like, I mean, I've heard them. when we talk.
That's
we did
right.
do Name of the Wind, which is one of my favorite episodes.
That one had to be the first one. People.
Yeah.
That's one of our hallmark
It's
episodes.
our most downloaded of all time. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if our listeners care about me saying that, but
it was at one point. I'm not sure if those numbers have changed since we've grown so much, but that's what it was for the longest time. And yeah, so we've got more coming. We have to figure out what we're going to do on Friday, but rest assured it's going to be a classic that you're not going to want to miss. So tune in for that, guys. And Dylan, I don't think there's anything left for us to do but play that sweet, sweet outro music.
Let's get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right, here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. This has been your co-hosts, Charles and Dylan, coming at you today with our favorite fathers in fantasy from the Fantology poll. If you like what you heard today, check us out over on Twitter at the FTF podcast with a number 1 at the end. And we're also on Instagram at the FTF podcast. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even further, and they just so happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just find that Friends Talking Fantasy page on the Apple Podcast app. Scroll down past all those episodes until you start seeing stars. Once you're seeing stars, the optimal number of stars to click in order to support the show would be 5 of them. That's another F for you.
There you go.
Yes, if you have a little bit of extra time, then writing a review is extremely helpful for a podcast like ours. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
Guys, just listening, thank you so much. We greatly appreciate you checking out our show. It means a lot that you'd listen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.